Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, the particularities of content marketing and social media in Europe. With all the different languages spoken across the continent and so many cultural differences, how do you tailor campaigns to reach your target audiences here? Can you use the same marketing campaign for Germany or for France? Can you use the same social media channels to reach people in both Spain and in Portugal? The short answer is no, but we'll let the experts weigh in today. I'm here with my co-host, Shaheen Samavati, CEO of Vera Content, and Adriana Carles, Head of Content and Social Media at Ladenzile. We're delighted to welcome Adriana back to the show. When we first talked to her 6 months ago, she had recently started at Ladenzile, where a big part of her role is managing international content and local social media pages for the company's global shop-alike brand. As a native of Venezuela, she has been based in Germany for the past 7 years. And before Ladenzile, she was a senior brand and content manager at another German tech company in the financial sector. So welcome back to the podcast, Adriana. It's great to have you
Hi.
back.
Thank you guys for having me back. Very excited to be here and to have this very interesting discussion today.
No, it's so great to have you back and to have you meet Shaheen as well.
Yeah, great to be on the show with you today.
Yeah,
awesome.
Nice to see you.
So when we last talked to you, we learned a bit more about your career journey. And for those who haven't listened, definitely go and check out that episode, which is titled Content Marketing is a Marathon, Not a Sprint. But today we like to get super specific and talk a bit more about the tactics for creating content that resonates with diverse markets across Europe and how to get your strategy just right. I'll also direct some of my questions to Shaheen, who built Vera Content, which is specialized in managing teams of linguists that run global content and social media marketing initiatives for diverse clients. So I guess we can get started. And I'm going to ask our first question, which is I want to learn a bit more about your experiences, both of your experiences with localization. So can you just tell us a bit more about what experience you have? And
yeah. Oh, I can go first, I guess.
Yeah, Shaheen, totally go first.
Yeah, I mean, so my background is as a journalist. I'm from the US and I've been living in Spain now for over a decade. And I started Vera Content, as Kyler mentioned, and really my career transitioned from journalism into translation because I was living abroad in Spain. I had a lot of experience doing localizations into English because that was people kind of. I realized there was this opportunity as a journalist to become a kind of expert translator on more creative kind of texts. And that's kind of was the seed for what built my business. So now Vera Content, we do the same thing, but into many different languages, especially focusing on European languages. And now we've been 6 years doing this. So, we work with people who are more writing profiles, but who also do translation so that we focus on really adapting the text for the different markets.
Yeah, so it wasn't really something that you sought out. It was kind of, you had a journalistic background, and then because of the needs that you saw in the market, you kind of figured, why not learn more about localization and start your own agency?
Absolutely. I also had in-house experiences. So I had worked as a communication marketing manager as well. So I had experience kind of outsourcing to others, and I saw the kind of gap in the market as well. So for quality translations, I had a lot of struggle with working with different providers who didn't meet my expectations at the time. So I love that problem.
That's awesome. How about you, Adriana? I mean, we talked a bit more about your background, and as someone who is, multilingual and multicultural, I'm sure it's something that kind of felt natural to you in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is, coming from Latin America, where, everything is done. I was working before in markets where, Spanish is the main language. And although we do have our cultural differences from, one country to another, how do you say this word here and that word there is kind of funny between countries. But then now I moved to Europe, right? Where you travel a couple of hours and you're in a completely different culture, completely different language. This was a whole new ball game for me. And I also had to kind of understand, that localization plays such an important part when you are working in Europe, because, you have different markets that are super important and relevant for your company. And then how do you adapt that? And how do you choose, which market is the most important ones? Or how do you, how do you get your message across? So it has been interesting, experience for me as a professional to kind of learn how to do this. And, coming from, a complete different world and learning now, okay, this is relevant and I need to adapt the way I work and I need to adapt my content to fit this need. So, from the company perspective, having like working with, translators and editors and localization has been like a really relevant challenge for me and also for what I'm doing currently.
For sure. And, as you just mentioned, the European market is so fragmented. And I think like you were saying before, it's like for Shaheen and I being from the US, it's like driving from one state to the next. It's like we don't expect a different language or different culture, but the same distance here, it's just totally different. And there's so many different languages and cultures, and marketing resources only can go so far for localization.
Exactly.
So I guess this is like the $1 million question that we all have, but like, how do you both decide where to prioritize? Like, how do like for this campaign, I need to localize and for the other one, I don't. So I guess like, what are these key factors that you consider when deciding when to localize or when to not localize?
Well, maybe I can start. So I think like for us as a company, we made like a business decision. So company wise, we sat and we say, okay, we have 13 markets, but of course, all of them are not as relevant. And we had to really just go down to the bottom line. So where are we making money? Where are we making the revenue profits? And where do we see the best growing opportunities in that market, right? So I think it comes to us first as a business decision. So it's a strategic decision from business to say which are our most relevant markets. And then based on that, of course, you say, okay, where do you put your resources, right? So you're not going to, at least for us, it wasn't like we're not going to put the same amount of resources if we don't have the relevancy on all the markets. And for example, I also had this discussion the other day with a colleague from another company. They want to move into Europe or into Germany, and then they want to have the same languages or editors across the whole markets. And I'm like, okay, but what is it that you really want? Do you really want to have, what is your focus? What is your priority market? And then based on that, you have to find out what is your resources. And for us, at least as a company, it was really understanding, where is it that we're going to grow? And then based on that, where we're going to put more resources on creating unique content on that language, and where we were going to do more like translations or using other types of like, maybe outsourcing or freelancers. So that's really what came down to us. It's a business decision in the end.
Yeah. So for you, it's really just, it makes sense, wherever the demand is, but also like wherever your, more revenue is going to be coming from, which markets you want to focus on, and also understanding the markets and what's better received there in comparison to the others as well. Now, Shaheen, do you agree with that? Or do you have, a different experience in terms of?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, we work with, of course, a lot of different clients who have like very different approaches, and there's obviously like a huge difference depending on the size of the business and how much budget they have for localization. Yeah. I'd say like really large corporations, some of them are just everywhere in a way, like, and they have really dedicated teams for all the regions. And then they have, and they're localizing for even much smaller markets, I would say, where when you see companies, especially startups or smaller companies they have to prioritize more, they have to make more decisions. And of course, they need to be more strategic in general, like with where they want to sell, where they want to enter the market. Because unless you're already like a super well-known brand that's Coca-Cola in every market, everyone knows, right? You have to kind of decide where you want to start. So I think I totally agree with what Adriana said. It's it's not only a marketing decision, it's a business decision. It has to be in line with your strategy and make sense. And it is expensive, of course, to the resources that you need to put into creating new materials for every market. So you need to be really strategic about how you
exactly. Now, I feel like you both mentioned too, like, the whole concept of resources, and Adriana, you really touched upon the idea of like, well, maybe you have to like outsource some things, and, with freelancers, and if you don't have the money or the time to do that, it can be very difficult to really organize it and also like hit the target.
Well, I just wanted to make a point about what we were talking about before, because one thing I've definitely seen with a lot of our clients are more like startups, I would say, and that you have to make those decisions about where they invest in localization. And of course, like the most common you see is people investing in like the largest markets, so like Germany, France, Spain, the UK. But like I would say that we do definitely like see exceptions to that because of like a business reason, focusing on some other markets. So, and we've also, we've done Scandinavian languages, we've done like much smaller European languages and some on other parts of the world. And another thing I was going to mention is that sometimes we see people make a huge change as well. And it oftentimes is that they think that they want to be in a lot of markets. And then once they see like how much work that is, then they're like, okay, maybe we should be in fewer. I don't know if that's something you've also seen, Adriana.
Yes, this is also something that we've seen. And this is actually the reason why we went into a prioritization mode, because we were in all the markets. We had like all the editors in all our markets, and we saw, okay, this is not possible, and this is also why we've now like focused on having, prioritizing some markets which are more relevant to us, where we put our the eggs in this little basket, and then the other ones, it's not that we don't think they're important. We do think that they're important, but of course we don't put all the resources. And I think that's exactly where we were, to the point where like, okay, this is not possible. And then for example, and I know we're going to talk about social media later, but we had like 13 social media channels for each of our markets, and it was like no real maintenance of them properly. And now we're like, okay, scratch that. We need to reduce, and just simplify, because it is impossible. Like, unless you are a big corporation, like you say, that you have such big budgets and huge teams to manage that. I think that for some companies, it's just a smart thing to do, to think like, really, where am I going to grow? And if it works, just roll it out in someplace else. But I think this focus, at least for us, it was important to take that step.
Yeah, because a lot of it's trial and error. It seems like you have to kind of feel it out, see how your target audience responds, and then decide later on if it's worth investing or if not. Because both of you said it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Yeah.
Now, I think that also like comes down to like when you're considering, right, like an approach to translating content or creating original content. That also depends, right, on how it's received, from trial and error before. So how do you decide if you want to like create original content for a certain market, or just translate from a certain content that you already have available in one language for one market? And how do you know like what content deserves more attention and when it doesn't? So maybe Adriana, I don't know if you have experience with that.
I think like for us, I think the hardest content to kind of translate so easily would be anything that's related to like campaigns or anything that is on brand. So when you really need like to bring emotions and personality and like these catchphrases that sound so amazing in English, but then or like you want to put them in German or in like Hungarian, it's like, oh my God, like how do you say that? I think this is the hardest part. I think this type of content deserves to be looked into by the original language, like how do we say this in a way that this emotion, or at least this idea, the same idea, and not with the exact same words, is translated, or it's like giving in this language, right? And this is what is hard. And this is where, like, for example, when we have like, I don't know, ideas for like a campaign, I don't know, for a sale or for something that we want to do that is like more on brand, that is more emotional, that we want to connect more. This is where we have the challenges. It's not so easy to translate. It's not easy to just do that across the languages. And where we have to say, okay, how is this like gonna work for in German, for example? And sometimes we, at the beginning, we started doing it first in English. And now what we're doing is like, okay, because German is our main market, we do it in parallel. So German in English at the same time. So in a way that, okay, like it makes sense for both languages. And then the other languages just come in after that in the discussion. But this is, for us at least, something that is really kind of like what we're working with right now. And then the second type of content that for us is really important also to get it right is content that we do to our partners. So anything where we want to communicate to our main customers who are our shops, right? So for this, we have decided as a company that we will communicate in our all 12 markets. So it's a very nice challenge when we have to do all our B2B content. Why? Because we decided that, we want our partners to be able to understand us. We want to speak their own language. We want, we're working with shops, I don't know, like in the Czech Republic that, have 2,000 products. It's not like a big shop, but we're giving them the opportunity to display our products in our page, and we want to be able for them to understand this. And if we only speak in English, it's very hard. So we have success managers for each of those markets. So that means that we also have content based on those markets. And everything we do, from like sales outreach, every kind of sales material is done on the 12th mark for 12 languages. Right. And this is a lot of work. I think this is, I think, the biggest chunk of work we have when it comes to localization and languages, when we have, I think, the strategic decision to also make it that way and make it relevant for us, at least.
Yeah. And I feel like you brought up really two like important factors. One is like, obviously, if you want to have important information in a campaign, for example, that you need your, the consumers, right, to understand, exactly. It has to be in their language. But I also think you brought up a really good point, which is emotion. Like when a campaign has like an emotional pull to it, it's so much easier. Like, I think as all of us, right, we speak different languages, but I think when something resonates more with me, it might be in my native language, which is English. So I think it's so important if you really want to like, convey that emotion, it's so much better to localize it and to maybe start from scratch and write it and kind of, brainstorm how we convey the same message using an expression or a saying that's going to resonate with the audience. Now, Shaheen, in your experience, have you found similar trends or something?
I was going to say, like, I'd say like the most common circumstance where we're creating like totally original content in a different language is because of a particular campaign that the client is doing in one market that they might not be doing in the other one. So it's like, okay, we want to create a blog about this topic. We're going to do a social media campaign on this topic for this market that we're not doing in the others. So then, of course, that's going to be all original. But besides that, obviously, if it's like something that is the same content in different markets, whether that's a blog or social media posts or whatever, it obviously doesn't make sense to like reinvent the wheel. but we never do like straight translation. Like it's always rethinking this. Does this work for the market? Do we need to change it? We might, like, even though we're going to use as a basis like the content from one market for the other, we're still going to think like we might totally change it. Like, for example, a content calendar for social media, if we have a post about something in one market and that doesn't work well in the other, we're going to rethink like, okay, what other posts could we do here? But of course, if the content is usable, we're also going to make use of that, like, because we've already put in the resources to create that good piece of content, right? But just requires some critical thinking about what works and what doesn't, and having the people who know those markets to make those judgments, I think.
Yeah. And that's like a huge differentiating factor, right? When it comes to translation versus localization, like when you can simply translate something, okay, that's, it's pretty straightforward, but it's not the same as, taking the extra step, which I think when I describe to people like what my company does, for example, and like what we do on a daily basis, it's like they actually like get shocked because it's like they know what translation is, but they never thought about how, like, okay, when you're localizing something, you have to change. If you're having a blog post with certain examples that might have an impact in one market, you're gonna have to go and find a similar example in another market that can convey the same message, right? So it's such a it's more than just a translation. It's kind of, so you can do it like, you can create original content for each market, but you can also take the approach of having, like Shaheen was saying, don't reinvent the wheel. You already have the content, but just doing a good localized translation of it, because it's kind of like two birds with one stone.
Adriana said, I think like the most difficult type of transcreation is like a claim or like some really important, like title or something used in an advertisement or something. It's like that has to be like exactly right. And it's you can actually, for something that's only like a 5-word translation, you can get several people involved and spend hours.
It can be crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah. And in the end, you're always making compromises, right? Like, because you're never going to find that exact same thing. You're going to find something similar, which, gets the same note. But in the end, this is like, I think these are definitely the hardest one. These like, smaller concepts, to get, because I have this thing like the smaller and the catchier and this core messages, those are the hardest ones to kind of replicate across languages, for sure.
For example, Kyler remembers the project when we did our own slogan, "Say what you mean" into 7 languages.
Yes.
It was so hard because actually the word "mean" doesn't exist in a lot of languages, for example.
I think it was easiest in German. I think that was like the easiest translation, but the other ones, the Romance languages were hard to like convey that same message. And I think we spent like weeks on that and like working with our collaborators to figure it out.
So some slogans are just so important to the business that you want to make sure you get it right and spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, exactly. You have to get it right. Yeah, exactly.
The little things matter. But also now, I guess like another, topic that comes up a lot in our field is just like organic content versus content for paid advertising and like with localization. So does the approach change when it comes to like, if you're working with something that's organic or you're doing paid advertising? So Adriana, I don't know if you have any like insight on that from your own experience.
Yeah, so currently I do not, so this is not the area that I manage, particularly not entirely. We have like a complete different team of amazing people doing, the paid stuff. But of course we do work closely together. But a bit of the difference here is because, paid is such a big chunk of the budget and also such a big chunk of, the traffic that we get to our site. I think that, we do have more people working on this team that are actually in-house as opposed to the organic. So from the organic side, sometimes we work more, outside or freelancing, and we kind of use more of the resources we keep the resource in-house for this because it's really relevant to the business. And this, I would say, is a bit of the difference strategically. So let's say that, maybe for the organic content, we just have some editors from some countries in-house. For the paid stuff, we do have more in-house resources, like a person, at least one person from each of the languages in the team. And I think depending on the size of, the importance of the country, the more people on that team for that country. When it comes to the copies, of course, everything is shorter, right? So it's not like you need tons of huge, it's not a huge amount of time. So this is also like these people are not only expert writers, but they also understand how to implement the campaigns, which is so completely different from the profile that you need for people who are working the organic part, because you need, people who can write, who can do infographics, who can do a lot of different types of content. While on the paid part, copy is part of it, but there's a lot of, part of it, like optimizing the campaign and understanding how it works. So I think this is like, for us particularly, how the difference between both of them, I would say. But of course, there is some localization that goes into it and a lot of testing that goes into it. So for example, I sometimes look at the copies and I'm like, I hate this copy. From my perspective, this is not, I don't like this copy. That's what it works, but it's what works, So in the end, that's what matters. So this is a bit of the difference. I mean, it also matters the same for organic, but I think in this case, the subjectiveness, it's really easier. It's so much easier to test things in the paid part than on the organic side. So I think this is also something that's really relevant there, and that kind of also should help the organic part get better. But yeah, this is a bit of how we work when it comes to paid versus organic.
So two different approaches. It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges. It's
completely
kind of, you have to
different.
Clear it separately.
It's completely different. Yeah, it's so different. Yeah.
You have to,
I'd say, as someone with a journalist background, I've totally grown in respect for people who are sales copywriters, because it is such a different type of writing. And I mean, now we work with a lot of sales copywriters, and it's like coming up with those snappy things and things that get your attention. It's a different way of thinking about creating copy than when you're writing something like a longer form piece, for example. Yeah,
totally. It can be completely different for sure. And it's as a writer myself, and I used to be a copywriter, it was so hard for me to get into that mindset. But I think now with some practice, I can do it better. But still, you need to have a certain mindset in order to really get it right.
We tend to work with certain writers for the more journalistic kind of content and the more organic stuff, and then other writers for doing the more
exactly.
Some people are just better at one thing than the other, so it makes sense.
Exactly, to tap into those skills.
Yeah, I think this is the skill set, right? It also depends on the type of. I think here also depends on the type of company that you have and the type of ads you have. Because for us, for example, because we're like a product, a lot of our ads are just product ads. So it's very different. So depend on what kind of company you have, what kind of skills that you need for that paid marketing team, or for writing those copies. If you are marketing, I don't know, a software, I think then it gets a little bit more complicated, because what you need to put in that ad is more about the benefits. So it also depends on the product that you have and the skill set that you would need for the paid stuff, for sure.
For sure. Now, I think another challenge that we see a lot, especially Shaheen and I at Vera Content, is just many marketers are trying to figure out how to approach global social media, because that's a whole nother ball game, right? Of kind of, this is, we have all these different channels. Should we be doing it in different languages or the same language, a global page? So, we always are thinking what's the right number of social media pages and platforms to have for a brand? And also does it make sense to really centralize running those pages or have local teams handle them? So I'm going to ask Shaheen first, because I know she is an expert in this topic. So in your opinion, she is.
I'm really happy to hear this.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what do you think is the right number of social media pages and platforms to have? And does it make sense to centralize it or to
Well,
local
yeah,
teams
it's hard to be an expert because it's something that's like changing all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
But definitely I've seen a lot of different things.
Seen a lot.
Different things, and I've drawn some conclusions about what I think are the best practices, but of course it's like very subjective. But yeah, I think that like it was, well, probably around a little before we were starting Vera content. I'd say like 6 or 7 years ago, there was this boom of like, there was like new tools available in social media where you could, create multiple pages, especially on Facebook, that could be kind of redirected from your main page to the other language pages. And there was a lot of brands that like wanted to take advantage of that. And then also just, I guess there was just this idea in general that like brands were really figuring out how to use social media at that time. And it was like, okay, we need to be present in all the local markets. And a lot of people started making like a lot of pages in every and I think now we're in a phase of people reining that in a little bit and being more strategic. So, but yeah, that's kind of what we were talking about before. Like, I think Adriana mentioned like creating a lot of social media pages and then deciding to reduce them. And I think we've seen a lot of people doing the same thing. But of course, it is important to be in those markets where you feel like you need to really interact with the local audience in their language. It depends how present you are in that market and whether it really makes sense to do full localization for one market or another. And I think also a lot of our clients do take different approaches to like how much they localize for different platforms. And I do think still that Facebook is probably the one platform that has the best tools for localization and makes sense to do that if it's in line with your strategy. Whereas other platforms, it's a little bit less easy to make a good localized strategy, for example, Twitter, because there's like such like a fast-paced platform. It's like and you need to put a lot of like, you need to be really interactive there. So you need to have a really dedicated resource. And it's also just not, you have to have separate pages for everything. It's not like you can have it all kind of consolidated like you can on Facebook. They just have better tools for it. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does really depend on the platform.
It's a big topic.
Like the right channel and like, an Instagram, maybe it's not as important because it's such a visual tool versus Facebook where it is. So, and Adriana, I know you've had experience with this because you've referred to it before. So what's your opinion about social media?
In my previous company, it was so easy. We just had English as a language for all our global platforms. And I was like, yeah, creating content. This is so much fun. And now I moved here. We have 13 markets and it's just like, okay, it's gotten complicated, let's say. But I definitely agree with Shaheen here. Like, for example, like, we were having now, like a couple of years ago, before I joined, like, we had all the 13 markets had their own account and it was managed by the country. So like they would say like an editor who was doing like a multi-role of like copywriting, SEO, blog. So they were doing everything at once. And I think that the problem with this kind of approach is that because you don't have like a person specializing on actually knowing how the platform works. I mean, now social media has evolved in a way that is so relevant that you really need an expertise on even how to create content for the platform, how to post, when to post. Like it's really become its own thing. So this approach of having like a one-man show that does everything does not work anymore, really. It has to be somebody really looking into the platform, really looking into the numbers, understanding the audience, and then being able to build content to match that. That being said, we are now even moving from that approach of like, what do we do with these certain platforms? We first of all, we do not have the resources to manage 13 platforms the right way, right? It was just not properly. So we're going back to like a reduce, let's focus really, where's our focus? Again, going back to our business strategy, where do we see the most important growth in the future? And here we just kind of simplified into, at least for our like main channels where it's like Instagram, because we are, like a retail e-commerce, we're focusing on having 2 channels actually, which is German and then an English one for all our channels. And you would say, wow, English for like the whole European market. Why? Because like for us strategically, like we're not making huge money out of Instagram. It's the reality. It's still organic. So we want to grow grow here, but we want to grow more as a community and as a brand that actually to sell. So our idea right now, this is something that we're going to test out, is actually having more of a community. And we see other big brands also moving into this direction, of having one global network in one language for some platforms, like for example, for Instagram, as opposed to having like, I don't know, spread across, not enough growth, putting money into little ones instead of just building one big one. And this is the change that we're now going to make. And we're starting to make it. So I can tell you in a couple of months how it goes. But honestly, it's just that it's resource-wise impossible to manage 13 platforms. And also, I do believe in this kind of centralized approach where there's one team, with using one tool, because I think nowadays tools are super important to do this correctly, where you can see your analytics, where you can post from one place, and it's like more consistent. So I think for us, and in general, I think this is an approach that needs to be at least thought through, based on the resources of the company and based on the role of each channel. Because, like, for example, you mentioned Twitter, right? And maybe for some companies, it doesn't make sense to be on Twitter anymore, And this is something that companies now have to think, because we did go through the phase of like opening up all the channels. And then I've seen and I've had to go through the pain of like, okay, who owns this account? Who has the email? Let's ask Twitter, please, to give us this account back. And this is not only in this company, like I've been to like also my previous company, like trying to get back companies because accounts were open and nobody knew who owned them. The person left the company. So it's really important to just keep this as centralized as possible. Yes. And with the expertise of the team also.
For sure.
I totally agree with that point about like, you should only do as many as many channels or as many profiles as you can do well. And I think that really is different for every company, but it might be less than you're doing now. But yeah, of course, if you like we were talking about before, if you're a Coca-Cola or a Microsoft or whatever, you have the resources to do amazing, have the resources you need in every market. But if you don't have those resources, you have to think about like, what's
completely.
You could either be posting really generic content once a week, maybe with a scheduling tool, but is that having the is that having the impact that you want to have in that market, right?
Yeah, and something you both mentioned, I think something you both mentioned is just like you really have to take a step back and see like what makes sense. I think, and at the work that we do at Vera Content, it's a lot of the companies are small to medium-sized companies. They're not these Coca-Colas, so it's really important that because they have limited budgets. We have to do something with like a good purpose as well. So I think another, factor, right? So we've already talked about, should we centralize or should we have a lot of different channels? But I also think another thing that comes into play is, do we repurpose the content that we're using, or are we like, creating unique content for each channel that we're on? So I don't know if either of you have, insight on that, or, if you're doing something for Instagram, are you going to be using the same type of content for Instagram that you're going to use on Facebook? So I feel like there's a lot of, decisions that have to be made as well in terms of the content itself and that strategy you're going to put behind it. So I don't know.
Going back to the point that Adriana was making before, I think it's like increasingly important to really tailor your content for the platform, because now like new content types are becoming possible on some of these different platforms. Like, as you know, Instagram is like increasingly becoming like TikTok, so you can do different types of videos and they need to be formatted in different ways. And basically, of course, you can repurpose it to some degree, but you do need to think about the platform and how you're going to create that content for that platform so that it's, I guess, displayed in the best possible way, that it's working with the algorithm of that platform. And they're kind of like on top of the trends of like what kind of content is working on that particular platform.
Yeah, 100% agree there. I think, of course, like we go back to like, let's not reinvent the wheel. I really love that. There are some things that can be repurposed. Like, for example, now when we went about, like we're now in the process of like relaunching our social media channels, and we went about like first thinking what was going to be the role of each channel a bit, to understand what kind of content we wanted to create for that. And there are some content that you can't, for LinkedIn, it's obvious, right? This is like either your employer channel or your partner channel. So the content that goes there is completely different than what you're going to put like on an Instagram channel. This, like, for example, for us as a company, right? Because we are B2C, B2B, B2B companies. So in the end, this really depends, right? So you have to think of that platform and the content type that, the audience that you have on the platform, and what is the role for you of this channel. Because, for example, when it comes to Pinterest is like this, this whole other realm, you can get lots of traffic from Pinterest, but the type of content that you have to get traffic to your site is very different than the type of content you can have, for example, for Instagram, which can be more about inspiration and, getting people to like things and learn about you. So like, even when they are in which stage of the funnel they are, the platforms work very differently. So I definitely think that you have to really think about the platform, the role of the platform, what you mentioned, Shaheen, with the content types that work on each platform are completely different. So this is why I think it's better to have less and with more quality than being like all of them and not do them right. For sure. Nowadays, it's such an amount of work. I love when people come up to me, it's like, yeah, I want to open a channel. And I'm like, they have no idea the amount of work that is required. Like, I want to do these set of videos. Like, it's so easy, like, it's just like, let's do them in 3 days, half a day of shooting. And I'm like, they have no idea the amount of work, or like, for example, when, like they read like, oh, TikTok is now great. And I'm like, do you know how much work it takes to be on TikTok, to record these reels? And especially as a company, because as an individual, you can just go and do whatever you want. But as a company, you have, business goals, and you have things you have to do, and you have teams, and you have resources. So it's not the same to do it on a personal level than on a business level, right? And this is why I really think, yes, you can repurpose content, but you really need to do it smartly. Again, what is the business goal? For us,
even
for
on
example,
a personal level, it's like extremely time consuming. The people who are influencers, it's because they're spending all of their time doing that.
Exactly. That's a very good point.
As users, we never think about that.
Exactly.
Consuming.
It costs them little because we're not putting a value on their time. But if you're a teenager and you have nothing else to do and you're just 8 hours a day doing that, which I think is the
exactly
case in a lot of cases. And there's people obviously who make their careers out of doing that. Adults.
But answering that, I do think there are some things that you can repurpose. So, I've seen other accounts, like, for example, we're now doing this thing where we use some of the Instagram content to do on Facebook, right? Because I think these two platforms, there are things that can work for both of them and for our target audience, right? So it also depends on what kind of content you're creating. So there are things that can be repurposed. Like if you do a blog, I'm sure you can use this blog on several of your own platforms and spread it across. So you just have to kind of find the right balance, because it is not like you say, if you're a Coca-Cola, maybe you can have your own channel where this, I've seen these amazing channels where they have this specific role and it's just about sharing, unique content or user-generated content. And wow, that is amazing when they manage to have that. But I would say for most of the other companies in the world, we do have to repurpose and recycle content in a smart way across them, maybe split them up into pieces, like edit it a bit to make sure it works on the other one, because like, if not, resource wise, it would be really impossible to do this.
For sure.
And I totally agree with you that video, of course, is like the most time consuming type of content to make generally. And I think if you have a good video, you have to repurpose it for all the platforms.
Agree.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
But you need to edit it to fit the format of each one.
But I also think this is like where metrics come into play too, like in terms of like seeing what results you're getting and what actually works as well. And I'm not a numbers person, but it is important, right, to have the data to see like, okay, well, if this type of content's working well, I'm going to try to repurpose it for another one and see what the results are. So a lot of it's like checking those numbers and seeing what the engagement's like and what's actually working and what's not. So it's a lot of it's touch and go, I feel like. But also we were mentioning before too, like the whole, it's so important to plan. So a lot of times we have different content calendars for different, markets and channels, but I don't know if you guys both have experience working with, these calendars, but do you think like the calendar should be tailored for each channel and for each market as well? Or like in terms of localization, how does that work in your opinion? I don't know, maybe Shaheen?
Yeah, Shaheen, I would love to hear what you say.
Sure. I'm curious, what your best practice is here. Generally, like we tend to work, we do like a month of planning at a time for like the different social accounts that we work on with our clients. So we tend to ideally get it approved a few weeks before the month, but you don't want it to be too far in advance because it still needs to be relevant. So of course, actually, we just had we did some content about this recently, the fact that you have to be willing to change it because it's like things can happen and you want your content to be relevant. Sometimes you have to throw out the window the plan that you had. But yeah, we always plan though. So we come up with a plan for the content. I mean, generally, like it's kind of, I guess our approach to content calendars for social media is similar to the other types of content, like I mentioned. Like we tried to translate directly as much as possible, or as little as possible, and especially because with social media, there's so much like that is timely or that is particular to a market that there are a lot of changes do need to be made. But if we are, of course, it's also practical to reuse some of what you have. So we have a calendar for whatever the primary language is for the client, English oftentimes. So we might do the calendar in English, and then, create calendars for the other markets. But the local community manager is the one who's like really making sure that that's tailored and, using what's appropriate from the English calendar, but also coming up with their own ideas and planning specific content for the market, taking into account, local trends, political situation, holiday, all that stuff.
I love that point that you made, that like, okay, you should plan ahead, but at the same time, you need to like kind of be on your feet because you don't know. And we've seen this with, a pandemic and a war and all this stuff, like things are changing, right, in every market. So you're producing content that's going to really connect with people, but you have to like be in tune with what's going on. So you always, tomorrow something could happen and this post is not appropriate, then you're going to have to change the approach. So it's super good to plan, but also to, be, I guess, versatile in your approach. But for you, Adriana, like what best practices do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar, right? We do have like a calendar of, especially because our industry, in this case, it's a lot easier when it comes to the B2C calendar because we have certain dates that just happen throughout the year. So like, spring, summer, the season, fashion, Christmas. So like Q4 is like crazy seasons for us because we have like Black Friday, winter sales. So like this calendar is easy for us to keep across different regions, right? With some differences based on, I would say, dates. For example, Mother's Day is not the same everywhere in Europe. Father's Day is like, for example, super relevant in Austria, but not so relevant in Germany, right? So these are like the differences, the cultural differences that you mentioned, that you do need that kind of like, that local experience to know the differences. Because like, if you manage it from one central place and you don't have a person who knows that, you wouldn't know how important Father's Day is for Austria and that you need to do something relevant there on that day, right? And then you need to have that on your calendar and you need to plan it in advance. And these are things that we do look into it. So like these special dates, I would say. But then of course we do have other things, like for example, when it comes to SEO and trends, that we need to look at by country, So when it comes to example for SEO and trends, and this is what we're talking about, the data there, this you need to look into by country, because it's very different what people, for example, in Spain are searching for right now because of the weather, right? Just look into that, like compared to what people are looking for in Germany. So like you do have to tailor your calendars to those trends. So like what you're going to write, what kind of products you're going to offer, what kind of campaigns you're going to have based on those, very much like data-driven points, looking into what actual people are consuming or they want. So in our case, we have to look at both things at the same time to kind of build those calendars. So we have like, I would say one like more global one for, that could work for several countries, and one more local one based on specific trends that are happening in the market that you have to react to, like you're saying right now.
That's so true. I forgot about weather. That's even a factor too in terms of what people are looking at for search.
Super huge. Like, or there are already people looking into summer, and like here they're buying winter jackets still.
Still, for sure.
I was going to say like one tip, like one thing that's like worked well for us, that's kind of we've like learned along the way of like doing a lot of these global social media projects, is like creating these like surveys or even just different ways to ask for feedback from the people in the markets. So whenever we like launch a new social media page in a market, we'll ask the community manager to like answer a bunch of questions about like what they think will work and stuff, just to make sure that that we've thought about everything, right? So like, so we kind of just have like this checklist of topics to be like, how will this work in this market? Like, what types of, like kind of getting their feedback on what they think will work, what approach we should take in social media, and how we if what we have already is going to work in that market, or if we need to like make some big changes. And then I think it's also important to have just that ongoing communication with the person managing the page in the market. So we have like our project managers who every month with the calendar are asking them like, okay, how can we make this more relevant for this market? But I think you can get into just like this routine of producing content. So it is important to like proactively ask people to like think critically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what can we do better? How can we, you know, like, so I think every once in a while, like proactively asking those people, the people in the markets, like, what ideas do you have? How can we do it better?
Yeah, you have to be aware of these things. Now, you mentioned, Shaheen, the checklist, like having that as a tool to help you when you're planning your content. But for your content calendars, do you both use like any specific tools or things that help you? I mean, it'd be helpful for the listeners if they're trying to, you know, implement a new strategy or new calendar to know what tools to use.
And we're like across the board, depending on the client, as you know, Kyler. I'd say like the most common tool that many of our clients use is probably Trello, just because like really simple to use. And but I'd say it's a combination of like Trello and spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And it's funny because there are so many like fancy tools you can use to make content calendars, but it oftentimes it can be, I mean, I definitely feel like scheduling stuff. Yeah. Like we have, I mean, different clients who use different things. Like we use Sprout Social, we use Hootsuite, you know, like, but when it comes to planning the calendar, because so many other people who aren't the day-to-day social media managers like need to be involved in the decisions, it's oftentimes easier to like make, you know, the plan outside of those tools. So that's what, in something that's like easy to be shared and people can comment on. So that's why we tend to use like Sheets or
collaborative. Yeah,
exactly. And then we move that into the social media management tool to actually plan and schedule it. Yeah, for
sure.
Which varies widely depending on the client, because we need to work with whatever they're already, you know, it's kind of like embedded into their operations.
For sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think right now I've had all of that during my career. So like I've now using like, you know, like you said, we plan the calendar in like a normal sheet, in a normal meeting with people, we align. So like not all the stakeholders have access to all these tools. So like, because also like, you know, when you're in a smaller company, you can't give licenses away to like, hey, everybody, you know? So like we do kind of plan things like in meetings, and we align with, you know, in our case, our calendars, a lot of our calendars are aligned, sometimes even with sales teams. So there's a lot of alignment that takes place on a sheet, you know, and then gets shared and commented on. But then like the daily stuff, I think, you know, I worked in the past with having amazing tools that, you know, you can do everything, even the workflow. So I've also had the opportunity to work with like really great tools, like you're saying, from the, you know, in the company where everybody, you know, a bigger company with bigger budgets, where we had like even the workflows be in there and the whole calendar be there for social media, you know, like the global one, but then you can also split it by teams. Like, for example, if you have a stakeholder from sales that want a specific campaign, or if you want it, you know, like one of the other subsidiaries was doing their own thing, and people could see, and you see the different campaign views or the different calendar views per month, per day, per channel. And I have to say that I really miss this, because organizational wise, it's a lot easier to manage teams like this than via sheets. But there are good tools. I mean, there are a lot of tools. Like, I mean, we just signing with Falcon, you know, as a social media management system or a tool. So I think it is really important to have these tools, because they do make life a lot easier than when you're using the sheets, because a lot gets lost in translation, or which is the oldest one, which is the new version. And there's like, for example, we had to struggle with like having so many calendars that in the end, like when you search for it on our Google Drive, it's like, okay, which one is the last one?
Yeah, the most recent one. Yeah, it really depends. You have to be organized. So whether it's you doing it yourself or having a tool that really helps.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference for sure. Now we've come to the end of the interview. But you know, I think we've kind of had a really great discussion about all the different factors that go into localizing content. And I think we can clearly agree on, right, that, you know, you can't speak the same way to one market as you do in the other, especially here in Europe. But I think now we've kind of learned that there's all of these, you know, factors that go into, you know, should I localize here or should I not create original content? There's so many things that go into it. So it's not a simple yes or no answer or question, but at the same time, I think we can, all agree on the fact that, every market is different and you really need to be, listening to what's actually going on in each market to have an effective, marketing campaign, basically. But I wanted to ask both of you, if you have any final thoughts or, a piece of advice you want to share with our audience, maybe a summary of, the most important things that you're passionate about when it comes to localization. So Adriana, do you want to start?
Well, I'm not the localization expert. I have a person in my team, Ika. So shout out to Ika. She's amazing. She does it like every day. And I'm just like, odd to her, like how she manages this. But we signed up with a tool, a translation tool, and we changed. It completely was a game changer for us, having a translation management assistant on board. So if anybody wants to start this journey of localizing content, this is something you really need to look into. Having a tool in place with translation memory to really, you can't do this like we're now in 2022, so you can't do this like we were back in the the dark ages. You really need to have this in place, and this would be like my closing statement. We have this, and it completely changed this, so this is something you need to look into for sure.
For sure. And we love our translation tools, content too, with the memories and stuff. It's really helpful.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Shaheen?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Well, I would just say my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation, I think, is that obviously there's no right answer to
exactly
how much you should be localizing. I think it's different for every business. And like we said, it has to do with your strategy. It has to be in line with your strategy. And then, I had a second point, but now I forget.
But I think it's like what you said, Shaheen, too. Like you can't just produce content and forget about it. I think that's really important. Like you have to, I think we all can agree on that. You have to stop and think throughout the campaign or throughout every month to be like, okay, is this working or is this not? You have to be flexible with it.
Yeah, no, I think in the second point, coming back to Adriana's point that she made before about you should only do as much as you can do well. I think that's an important takeaway as well.
That's so important.
If you have to choose to think about what you can do really well, and also sometimes I think the decision is a little bit arbitrary. It's okay, you could be on all these platforms, you just have to choose.
Exactly.
You have to choose one or two or three or however many you can dedicate yourself to and do those really well. Maybe this other platform would also be great for your brand, but if you don't have the resources for it, you have to just let it go for now.
Completely agree.
It's easier to let it go. Just focus on what you're good at, which is sometimes can be overwhelming when you have so many different things available to you, but it's always simple is better, right? So I just want to thank both of you again for joining me today and sharing your such, rich insights with us. I'm sure our listeners are going to be really excited, and we're just really excited to have Shaheen back with us as well after a little bit of a break, and also to have Adriana back with us on the show. So thank you again, both of you, so much for your insight, and thanks everyone. I want to thank everyone for listening in. As always, for more perspectives on the content marketing industry in Europe, you can always go to veracontent.com/mix. And to also, if you want to listen to Adriana's previous interview with us, which I 100% recommend, because it was a lot of fun to get to connect with her that first time, head to the same page and you can look her name up in the search bar. But if you also want to get in touch with Adriana, I think the best way you could reach out to her is on LinkedIn. And if you want to get in touch with either Shaheen or myself, or if you have any interesting topics for an upcoming episode, feel free to reach out to us at our email address, which is mix@veracontent.com. And keep tuning in, as always, to the podcast for more interviews with content experts. So we'll see you all next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.